I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. President Trump hosted a White House ceremony today for the Public Safety Medal of Valor Awards. That's the highest national honor for a public safety officer. The awards are given each year to officers who have exhibited exceptional courage, regardless of personal safety, in the attempt to save or protect a human life. The president has directed the Justice Department to write regulations banning the use of accessories known as bump stocks. They allow semi-automatic rifles to be fired more rapidly. Police say the gunman who killed 17 people at a Florida high school last week used an AR-15 style rifle. And meantime, a group of students who survived that Florida school shooting are on a 400-mile trip to the state capitol to pressure lawmakers to act on a sweeping package of gun control laws. They plan to hold a rally tomorrow at the state capitol building, and tomorrow will mark 1 week since that mass shooting in Parkland, Florida. And a London-based lawyer, Alex van der Zwaan, has admitted he misled investigators about the last time he spoke with Rick Gates. Gates is a former associate of ex-Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg, and Bloomberg Technology is next.
I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Russian bots take on U.S. gun control, Russia's enduring and expanding Twitter campaign against America. Plus, Walmart's margins hit record lows as its fight with Amazon takes a toll, how investors are reacting. And the potential gold mine for advertisers looking to cash in on the new era of connected cars. But first, to our lead, Russian bots were caught targeting certain hashtags following last week's school shooting in Florida. Some adopted hashtags like gun control now, others used gun reform now and Parkland shooting. It's just one way to widen the divide among the U.S. electorate on how to handle gun control, making compromise even more difficult. This has happened with past issues like the NFL anthem debate and, of course, the 2016 U.S. presidential election. And this ultimately led to Mueller's indictment on 13 Russians for allegedly meddling in the U.S. elections. Twitter and Facebook are facing renewed pressure to do more to expose these bots and fake accounts. So are these tech giants doing enough? Let's welcome Bloomberg Tech's Selena Wang, who is covering this story for Bloomberg, and also with us Tara Mahler, Senior Policy Advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project, who joins us from D.C. So Tara, first of all, you've done so much work on counterterrorism over the years. What do you make of simply how these Russian bots are approaching this new particular tactic?
Sure. This has been a big week with the pressure on tech. Not only did you see the Russian bots come out in full force after the horrific and tragic events in Florida, but you also saw last week the Mueller indictment citing Facebook, I think 30-something times, Twitter and YouTube all mentioned. And that's because the tech companies have a number of problems on their hands. The bots, which came out after the Florida shooting, trending hashtags, trying to create divisions and divisive rhetoric, also, fake news, conspiracy theories. This is not new, but the real concern here is that this same tactic and strategy is going to be taken again in the midterm elections, and this same tactic and strategy is also taken by terrorist organizations who operate on these platforms. So I think what you're seeing right now is just another issue area, a tragic school shooting that Russia is trying to exploit across these platforms, and they clearly still have the ability to do so despite some minor reforms that have been made.
Selena, walk us through the tactics step by step.
What's fascinating here is that there's almost the exact same playbook that's been played over and over again. I spoke to the researcher of the Hamilton 68 project, which has been exactly tracking this, and he says it's almost exactly the same as what happened in Vegas. So day one, these bots are taking just a very innocuous tactic of retweeting and tweeting the breaking news. Then on day two, they're starting to tweet amplifications of the most extreme and divisive issues and opinions on gun control. Then by day three, this is when they start to promote conspiracy theories, and they want to start to destabilize American trust in public institutions, saying that the government, the media, the police are all lying to you. And this is something that we've seen over and over again. You mentioned earlier the NFL anthem issue and the presidential election. So the fear is that this same playbook will then be applied to the midterm elections coming up.
Now, Tara, how big a concern is it that this could move not just from, sowing discord on social media, but fabricating real life events? I mean, we now know that the Russians were behind creating a real life Islam protest in Texas. Could we see more of that?
Absolutely. I mean, this is right out of the Russian playbook, and they're going to continue to repeat it because it doesn't require them to employ a lot of resources. It's easy, and they've been effective. What needs to really happen here is the tech companies need to take steps not only to get down content that violates their terms of service, but there are other measures that they can take. Obviously, you're not going to be able to control what every individual writes online if it doesn't sort of cross a particular threshold. Having said that, on ad buying, there are specific measures that, Congress is pushing them to take going into the elections. On bots, the tech companies themselves have said they're not in favor of these and are trying to crack down on it. Well, why are there so many bots still operating on these platforms? That is a measure that if Twitter was serious about, I've seen different levels of reporting. I think 15% of accounts I've seen cited as are bots, and then 5% are what the tech companies claim. In any case, there are enough bots up there that are amplifying the messages of these fake news, Russia propaganda, counter, intelligence operations that may influence our midterm elections. So if the companies are serious, there are clear measures that they can take to crack down on some of this and make a real dent in the problem. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that happen yet, as evidenced by what's been going on this week.
So, Selena, you cover Twitter and extensively what they're doing and what they're not doing. How are they actually cracking down here when, yes, we know that a lot of bots have been kicked off the platform, but obviously there's still more than enough?
Twitter is doing all that they can, but they have multiple constraints. First of all, this is a company that has had financial issues. They only recently just reported their first real profitable quarter. They are dedicating as many engineers to this issue as they can, but we haven't heard them actually take steps to hire new people to address the problem. Another issue is that even though these algorithms that Twitter has are getting better and better, these bots are changing their tactics much faster than Twitter can keep up. I've spoken to many people on background who work at Twitter or used to work at Twitter who describe it as a whack-a-mole problem. The moment Twitter changes their algorithms to address spam and bots, we see a new type of pattern emerge, and that's the challenge that they're up against. That being said, they have made steps for transparency. They're starting an ad transparency center for political ads. They said in the 2018 elections they're going to be working much closer with candidates to make sure that they try to keep it as free from Russian meddling as possible.
Tara, when you hear that Twitter is doing all that it can, I mean, would you agree, or do you think Twitter can be doing more with the financial resources and the power that it has?
I think you hear that rhetoric coming out of all three of the big players here, Twitter, Facebook, and Google. You hear them repeatedly claim that they're doing all that they can. But I guess if you look at these companies and the amount of money and the size of these companies, they are sort of technical wizards. They're able to do a lot with your data when they want to do a lot with your data. And I think they can do a lot more to address some of these problems that are hitting society, from terrorism to Russian meddling in the elections to other nefarious foreign actors that are going to try to be meddling in various ways as well, particularly when the line is being crossed, and I'd argue laws are potentially being violated, which was what was happening in terms of ad buying. And if they don't fix that, I mean, that's going to continue to be a violation of the real world campaign election finance laws. I don't think the tech companies are going to have the luxury any longer of being able to sort of operate in this free space where laws are potentially being violated and things that wouldn't fly in reality are able to fly online. And I think what's going to happen here is you're going to see not just the public start to get fed up with this, but you're seeing other parts of the private sector, most notably advertisers. You had the Unilever executive a week or two ago threatening not to buy ads on these platforms because, to be frank, ad companies don't want baby product ads or Ben & Jerry's ice cream ads running on platforms where there's jihadist content, where there's Russian bots undermining our elections. It's bad form for advertisers. So I think you're going to hopefully see the tech companies step up. There have been a number of hearings on Capitol Hill, and I think you're seeing pressure out of the UK, grilled tech executives here in D.C. a week or two ago, and you've also seen them being grilled up on Capitol Hill.
Selena, Bob Mueller has indicted 3 companies, 13 individuals with relation to Russian meddling in the U.S. election. How is that related to the activity that we're seeing now? I mean, are these the same parties who are behind this?
What we're seeing from the indictment is that what Russia has been doing is much more well-financed, well-organized, and sophisticated than what Congress could have even imagined. And I definitely think that's creates some fear among lawmakers and these tech companies themselves. If they can be as well-organized themselves to combat these issues, they had operatives in multiple countries. They had very sophisticated measures to try to cover their tracks. They were buying servers in the U.S., computers here, doing all sorts of very sophisticated tactics to cover up what they were doing. Now, as Tara said, there are many tactics that these companies could employ that they aren't doing. Clint Watts, who has testified in front of Congress many times, who's part of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, says that Twitter should ban all social bots. Now, knowing what Twitter's mission is, this is not something that they would do, but there are obviously more drastic measures they could take. There's also been calls that these companies need to integrate and talk to each other more and have some sort of shared database about these sort of foreign influence networks of bots and figure out how to more easily and effectively target them together.
Tara, what is next? I mean, the midterm elections are coming up. I mean, are they going to be potentially another disaster?
Potentially they are. They are coming up quickly, and I don't think we've seen the amount of reforms that would be necessary to prevent the same type of meddling that we've seen happen on these platforms. A best case scenario is that we'll sort of see more of the same and that people will be more aware of the problem, so they won't perhaps fall victim or prey to some of the narratives that, you know, Russian bots and Russia intelligence operations are trying to carry out online, and people might look, you know, better at the information that's coming to them. But I don't think we're going to see a dramatic change unless the tech companies really take some swift and dramatic measures over the next year or so. And I think what's really troublesome here is it's not just about the midterm elections. I mean, this is about potentially any significant event or issue area in American domestic politics. When we see this happen after terrorist attacks, we see this happening after school shootings, we see terrorist groups exploiting these platforms as well to help radicalize people. So this is a problem. It's the same sort of technical issues at the heart of it, but it's a problem that's permeating a number of really, really important issues right now. And I'm hoping you'll see a groundswell of movement by the companies. But I think for the next election, what we really want to hope for is that there's no hacking into our sort of election systems, which we've been lucky not to have anything dramatic on that front, because that would create real havoc. At least this is more in the information realm, even though it was translating a bit into the real world with the organization of protest. It did not successfully interfere with people's voting or vote counts or anything like that. So a best case scenario, unfortunately, would be more of the same on the platforms and nothing that sort of directly hits the election system itself and the infrastructure.
All right, well, this is something we are going to continue to discuss. Tara Mueller, Senior Policy Advisor for the Counter-Extremism Project, and our very own Selena Wang of Bloomberg Tech. Thank you both so much for joining us. Well, a loss for AT&T in its proposed Time Warner deal. A judge has ruled the U.S. Justice Department does not have to identify whether there were communications between the White House and Attorney General Jeff Sessions. AT&T has suggested President Trump's dislike of Time Warner's CNN swayed the Justice Department's decision to oppose the takeover last year. An antitrust trial date has been set for March 19th. Coming up, Walmart is falling behind in its efforts to keep up with Amazon. We will bring you the latest on the retail giant's e-commerce slowdown next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Now, Walmart fell the most in over 2 years after delivering a disappointing annual profit forecast. The drop in stock comes as its once hot e-commerce unit begins to decelerate, sparking fears in traders about Walmart's chances to battle Amazon. Bloomberg's Matt Boyle covers the world's largest retailer, and also with us, Bloomberg Gadfly columnist Sarah Halzak in Washington. So, Matt, I want to start with you. What caused the slowdown in web sales?
Well, The slowdown in web sales was caused by some holiday snafus. It took us a while to get the sort of truth out of them over the course of this analyst call, but CEO Doug McMillon did say eventually that the influx of all the holiday-related gifts and toys, it just kind of threw their system out of whack a little bit, and that prevented some orders of just basic goods, you know, paper towels and the like, from getting to customers. So that was part of it, certainly. Another part of it is that they came upon the one-year anniversary of their acquisition of Jet.com, and you knew, and they had told us, of course, that the growth rate was certainly going to slow. They had guided to a 40% growth rate for this fiscal year, but I don't think anybody was expecting a number as low as 23%, and the share certainly reacted to that.
So, Sarah, talk to us a little bit about the Jet.com acquisition and how that factors in. I mean, you would hope that more of this growth would have happened organically, but how much of it was coming from Jet.com?
Yeah, I think that's the big question that today's results have posed to us. Walmart has been telling us all along that the core of their improvement that they've seen in the last 3 quarters has been organic sales from their own Walmart.com website, and that Jet.com has been a nice additive but hasn't really been the heartbeat of the growth. And I think this just raises questions about if they're going to hit this 40% growth target in the fiscal year ahead that Matt just pointed out. How are they going to do that with this stumble this quarter?
Let's talk about the how, Matt. I mean, what are the bright spots that Walmart has going for it, you know, when they're going up against a company that is all e-commerce like Amazon?
Their biggest bright spot is very clear. It's food. Walmart is the nation's biggest grocer. Let's not forget that. And they now have curbside online grocery pickup where you don't have to go into the store. You place your order online. You drive into the parking lot. You alert them that you're there on your Walmart app, and a friendly employee trots out to your car and puts it in the back of your car. They have that in over 1,100 stores now, and they're putting it in another 1,000 stores. So more than about half of their U.S. store base will have curbside grocery pickup by the end of this fiscal year, and that's a huge advantage over Amazon, who are still sort of figuring out how to do food online, despite the acquisition of Whole Foods, which got so much attention. Let's remember that online food, Walmart is really the 800-pound gorilla here.
So if that's the bright spot, what's the dark spot?
Well, the dark spot is, lots of other categories. Apparel is a business that Walmart has never really gotten right. They've been trying to get back at it. We had a story Friday about them launching some new clothing brands. They bought ModCloth. They bought Bonobos. So they are making some inroads. But outside of food, it's just a case where people are just shopping for price. They're shopping for convenience. Amazon Prime is a huge benefit. Walmart has countered that by saying, look, if you order $35 or more, you'll get 2-day free shipping. So let's remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Walmart has had quite a few good quarters in a row. They had a bad one today, but this battle is certainly far from over.
So, Sarah, we're talking about the last year. What does the next year look like for Walmart.com from your perspective?
I think we should see some interesting innovation from them in the e-commerce space that hopefully will tell us a little bit more about their long-term prospects. I think one is the implementation of smart cart technology, which is something Jet.com has pioneered, where essentially you get a discount for bundling your orders as opposed to firing off orders for individual items at a time. It helps the retailer with profitability, and Walmart's going to try to roll that out more broadly in this year, and it'll be really interesting to see if consumers respond to that, particularly the classic Walmart consumer who's really budget conscious.
All right. Well, obviously something we're going to continue to follow. Bloomberg Gadfly columnist Sarah Halzak, thanks so much, as well as our very own Matt Boyle, who covers Walmart. Thank you both so much for weighing in. Coming up, Qualcomm sweetens its offer for NXP, much to Broadcom's chagrin. The latest twists and turns explained next. This is Bloomberg. It was a busy day for Domino's as the pizza maker reported its fourth quarter earnings report. The restaurant chain matched Wall Street expectations, but announced the first revenue miss since the first quarter of 2016. About half of Domino's sales is done online. But CEO Patrick Doyle says the percentage of digital sales is less important than working with the customer. He spoke with Bloomberg earlier.
Ultimately, the percentage of sales is less important than what you do with those customers once they're there. So if you've got a great analytics group, which we do, you're finding ways to drive more sales from those customers once they've signed up with them. Our loyalty program, I think, has been terrific for us and for our customers.
Well, Qualcomm has raised its bid for NXP semiconductors by 16% to shore up support from shareholders who are balking. The new all-cash offer is valued at about $43 billion. Qualcomm itself is fighting off a takeover attempt. It's rejected a $121 billion offer from Broadcom. Joining us now, Bloomberg Tech's Ian King, who covers all things Qualcomm. So first of all, walk us through the new developments that happened over the weekend, very critical to this issue right now.
Exactly. I mean, the weekend didn't start off well for Qualcomm. ISS and Glass Lewis actually early this morning, the two investment advisory services that work for the big institutional investors that tell them, really, you should look at this way, you should vote this way, kind of came out a lot more strongly against Qualcomm and in favor of Broadcom than people had been expecting.
How so?
ISS didn't give Broadcom the full slate of directors, but what they were was quite critical of Qualcomm's management, said Broadcom's management is much better. Glass Lewis went even further and said, vote for Broadcom.
So what does this mean for NXP, which has been going on? I feel like you and I have been talking about this for a year.
Yeah, it's more than a year. As you say, it's 14 months now since it was initially announced. This has been the regulatory approval thing. Still got China to go, but what Qualcomm did was actually go out and say, okay, we're raising our bid for this. This is the money to bring in all of those investors like Elliott, like Sorobon, like all of those hedge funds that have been trying to hold the deal up and ask for more money. Appears to have got over at least that hurdle now.
So how does Qualcomm's effort to buy NXP impact Broadcom's effort to buy Qualcomm?
Right, and that's a very good question. It's also complicated because Broadcom...
It's Shakespearean, what's going on here.
So the thing to know is Broadcom told Qualcomm, don't do it, or if you do it for 110. Our bid for you is contingent upon you paying 110. Now they're paying 127. Obviously that doesn't look good. But behind the scenes, what's going on is Qualcomm has a lot of cash, $30 billion. So effectively, Broadcom's bid for Qualcomm is kind of a leverage buyout. It's counting on that cash making this deal much more palatable financially. That cash goes away if NXP is bought by Qualcomm, so it makes that bid that much harder.
Now, you've been covering the chip industry for many, many years. How would you rank the level of drama that we're seeing right now? I mean, is this, more dramatic than you have ever seen in your career as a reporter?
Never seen anything like this. I mean, this is the biggest deal in the history of technology, never mind the chip industry. And the level of complication when you have two extremely large transactions intertwined, things, it seems like 1 minute one team is winning and next minute another team is winning. Looks like we're going for March the 8th.
And just a quick sense, do you have a sense which way it'll go?
On Saturday morning when ISS came out, I thought, wow, looks like Broadcom's winning. Then when Qualcomm was able to close NXP, that kind of dragged things back.
All right, anyone's guess. Ian King, who covers chips for Bloomberg Tech, thank you so much for giving us the play-by-play, as always. Coming up, one of the fastest-growing cloud and data software firms just added a tech veteran to its board. We'll speak with Rubrik CEO and Microsoft Chairman John Thompson next. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. During the Valor Medal Awards at the White House today, President Trump says he's making moves that could lead to a ban on the use of so-called bump stocks on legal weapons.
Just a few moments ago, I signed a memorandum directing the Attorney General to propose regulations to ban all devices that turn legal weapons into machine guns. I expect that these critical regulations will be finalized, Jeff, very soon.
The Trump administration wants to give consumers the option of buying less coverage in exchange for reduced premiums. The proposed regulations would expand an alternative to the comprehensive medical plans required under the Affordable Care Act. Individuals could buy so-called short-term policies for up to 12 months, but the coverage would omit key consumer protections and offer fewer benefits. On Capitol Hill, senators are scrambling for fallback options to prevent the deportation of young people who arrived in the U.S. illegally as children. The clock's ticking toward expiration of the program that allows them to stay. Immigration legislation failed last week in Congress, and none of the plans put forward since then has gained traction. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in Washington. It is 6:30 Wednesday morning in Hong Kong, where we are joined by Bloomberg's Sophie Kamarudin with a look at the markets. Sophie, good morning to you.
Good morning, Elisa. Looks like stock market jitters. Those have returned with a renewed focus on rising bond yields after the U.S. Treasury opened up those auction floodgates. So that risk-off mood that descended on Asia on Tuesday, that is likely to continue after the struggle on Wall Street. In terms of catalysts for the region, count China out, still offline for the Lunar New Year. And on the data docket, we have Japanese manufacturing PMI to look out for. And from Australia, wage data. That will be closely watched for signs that strong jobs growth that could be starting to boost incomes and steer inflation. Plus, the earnings deluge that continues in Sydney from Fortescue to Santos and Wesfarmers. And in the currency markets, a firmer dollar that will likely be a driver, and we are seeing that rebound in crude slowing somewhat. This is comments from the U.S. Deputy Energy Secretary saying American oil output that is on track for phenomenal growth this year, which is countering OPEC's view that rebalancing is gaining traction. In Hong Kong, I'm Sophie Kamarudin. Up next, more with Bloomberg Technology.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Launched in 2014, data and cloud software firm Rubrik has seen rapid growth. It reached unicorn status last year with a $1 billion-plus valuation thanks to interest from investors like Khosla Ventures and Greylock. Now it is picking up the momentum with the help of Microsoft chair John Thompson, who just joined the board and is advising the company. Thompson joins us now with Rubrik CEO and co-founder Bipul Sinha. And you, of course, invested in one of the earliest rounds, but that's impressive in 4 years. Data backup and recovery, it's not the most obvious or sexy topic, but it fills a huge need for businesses. What makes your product stand out from the rest?
The way we built Rubrik is to connect to public cloud and have a single software fabric that goes from on-premises to the cloud. And this unique architecture has propelled Rubrik around the world into the largest enterprises who wants to keep and manage their data.
So, John, you've seen so many technological shifts. What stood out to you as special here?
Well, my sense is that every 15 years or so, there is an inflection point in every segment of our industry. And no innovation had really entered this particular segment for the last 15 or 20 years. And so my view was it was time. And so when I got introduced to Bipul, I thought, why not make an investment in him and the team that he has put together, because it's time for a change in this sector.
So why use this versus what Amazon or Microsoft Azure have to offer?
We actually partner with both Amazon and Microsoft for the data management. Just because applications run in the cloud doesn't mean that the need for data protection, data management go away. So in fact, both Microsoft and Amazon have deeper partnership with Rubrik, and we go to market together.
So we hear this word partnership a lot when talking about enterprise companies, and I'm just curious, John, from your perspective, who's going to own what? And when does a partnership not make sense? It makes sense to own as much territory as possible.
Well, let's be clear. The customer owns the data. Neither Microsoft nor Amazon nor Google or anyone else, particularly around the enterprise space, should feel like they own the data. The customer owns the data. I think as time goes on, however, it will become an issue of who has the strongest share in the enterprise. And clearly, Microsoft has a pretty strong position. AWS has done very, very well, primarily, I would say, with early stage companies looking for a cloud-based platform. For those enterprise customers who really want to move their data and apps to the cloud, they've chosen to opt for Microsoft as opposed to other alternatives. And I think that's a good thing for Microsoft and a good thing for those clients as well.
What does it mean for the up-and-comers like Rubrik?
Well, one of the great things about Rubrik is that it is what one would refer to as the hybrid model. It acknowledges and recognizes that a certain amount of the data is going to remain on-prem for some period of time, and a certain amount of it is going to move to the cloud. So the customer gets to make a choice as to where they might want their data to reside. And that's a good thing for Rubrik, and quite frankly, a good thing for the client.
Where do you see the cloud industry going? I mean, there is all this talk about hybrid, but at a certain point, again, it's about ownership, right? You know, public cloud versus private cloud. Which cloud will be bigger in the future? Or will this hybrid model endure for the long term?
So for Rubrik, the way we think about our business, we want to manage customer data, enterprise data, wherever it is, whether it's on premises or cloud or both. It really doesn't matter to us. What we are seeing in the marketplace is large enterprises are looking at public cloud and saying that how do I gain operational agility by going into the public cloud? And if you look at Rubrik's growth is kind of indexed on the growth of public cloud. I mean, we grew from 0 employees 4 years ago to over 800 employees, $300 million annualized run rate. We just hired Murray Demo from Atlassian to be our CFO. John joined me on the board to help us build a long-term 30-year company. Our vision is that wherever companies want to run their application, whether it's on-premises or cloud or both, we want to be the data management platform.
You're making a huge commitment to your customers to protect their data, and this is in an age where data may be, I don't know, is it more unsafe than it's ever been before? Because hack attacks are, there are so many bad actors out there. John, how would you sort of characterize the threat environment and the importance of, protecting your data with a product like this?
Well, there's no question that the landscape has changed quite substantially from when I joined Symantec back in 1999. There are more experienced hackers attacking us, and quite frankly, there are more geopolitical attacks that are going on, which are hard to separate from someone who's in it for profit versus someone who's in it for intelligence, if you will. And so I think one of the things that Rubrik has done that is quite phenomenal is that they have integrated not just data management, but security management into the platform. So customers get the benefit of both when they go to the Rubrik platform, which is something I had envisioned a few years ago, for sure.
When you look out at the threat landscape, and especially given your time at Symantec, what concerns you the most? I mean, what are the most dangerous threats that we're facing?
The greatest vulnerability we have in the world is you and me, because we make mistakes when phishing campaigns come our way that look real. And invariably, that becomes one of the single most significant exposures for every organization, that one of their employees naively clicks on a link that creates an absolute disaster. Even I've done that, I'll admit that.
So, if it comes down to individuals, even the most educated individuals make mistakes.
That's exactly
right. So, Bipul, how can you ensure, if someone is paying for your service and something goes wrong, that's a big deal. How do you ensure that their data is protected?
So the way we think about the data management, data protection is that we assume that something will get in and something will go wrong. Rubrik is the mitigation platform, the last line of defense. So if something goes wrong, we can get you up and running. We can bring the data back to you instantaneously, and that's the Rubrik's business.
The recovery process.
The recovery process.
So last question for you, John. Do you see consolidation ultimately in this part of the industry?
Well, I think right now there are probably 7 or so large global cloud providers. I don't see any of them consolidating with each other, that's for sure. But that's easier said than done, but it may be hard to do given the size and scale of those companies. I don't envision, however, many of what I would call the tier 2 players ever really reaching tier 1. And I'll let you define who's in tier 2 versus who's in tier 1.
I have some ideas. All right. John Thompson, chair of Microsoft, now on the Rubrik board. Rubrik CEO Bipul Sinha, thank you both so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
For joining us. All right, Coinbase, the largest U.S. cryptocurrency exchange, is planning to roll out a long-awaited software update in an effort to reduce transaction fees customers pay when sending Bitcoin. The upgrade was first made available by developers in August as Bitcoin's growing popularity led to congestion in the network. Most recently, the company received an influx of complaints about inefficiency and high transaction charges. Coinbase said in a tweet Tuesday that it will begin a phased rollout this week. Coming up, we'll hear from FireEye CEO Kevin Mandia. Speaking of security, how is the cybersecurity company helping to secure U.S. election systems as we near the start of the primaries for the U.S. midterms? This is Bloomberg. Japan's SoftBank is working with Nomura on what could be a $19 billion IPO of its domestic telecom business. According to people familiar with the matter, SoftBank may market most of the offering to Japanese individuals. The IPO would be Japan's largest in 2 decades. On the heels of new accusations of Russians meddling to influence the 2016 presidential election, and as the U.S. looks toward midterms, just how vulnerable can companies be to future interference? Bloomberg anchors David Weston and Sherry An asked that question of FireEye CEO Kevin Mandia. Take a listen.
There's technical vulnerabilities. Can Russia hack and steal documents? That's always going to be a tool in their toolkit that they can use. But that's also something that's obvious, right? That's something that we can often trace back. We can pierce anonymity and say, hey, the Russians stole those documents and they're leaking them. When it comes to the sharing of ideas and ideology, we're an open country. And I think we got to sort out as a nation, where are the boundaries between how people, you can have one person in today's world be represented by 500 to 1,000 online personas, and that exaggerates or often amplifies the influence of a single individual. So I think influencing operations or information operations like that are here to stay. I think every government's going to use them to some extent, and we have to figure out how do we find them and how do we counter them appropriately.
Kevin, you are at the eye of the cybersecurity storm, per se. You actually released a report on Chinese cyber spies.
5 years ago.
5 years ago. How does this compare, what Russia has done, to something that you've seen in the past?
There's a general continuum. I can tell you I've observed Russia my whole career. And on offensive operations, it used to be there was rules of the playground, I called it. Whenever they hacked us, they had good operational security. It was military against military, government against government. And I think that started to change around 2015. Their operational security slipped a little bit, maybe meaning they weren't doing the counter forensics. Their targeting broadened a little bit. And the rules of engagement seemed to just spiral into other areas like doxing and releasing documents. These are things they didn't do for 2 decades in my career, but now they're doing it. So it's obvious to me we haven't settled on what are the appropriate rules of engagement between nations.
So Kevin, how much of it is because they're so terribly sophisticated, and how much of it is because we don't take the time and effort to actually defend ourselves? A lot of those emails that were stolen, people say they could have taken basic steps to protect their emails.
Well, it's hard to defend a network. Think about playing goalie against Wayne Gretzky. Sooner or later, the puck's getting in the net. It's the same thing when you're up against Russian hackers. Sooner or later, they're going to score a goal on you.
Well, then what's to be done? If that's the situation, why should they agree to rules of engagement?
Well, good point. It's asymmetrical, and there might not be a good reason. The bottom line is we have to impose some kind of proportional response. We have to make risks or repercussions, whether it's diplomatically. But if all we do is play defense, it's going to be a long slog, and the puck will get in the net.
Just an hour after news broke about the school shooting in Florida, we had these Twitter accounts suspected of having links with Russia, just sending out hundreds of posts, taking up the gun control debate. Why can't these bots be reined in?
Well, we're a country that staunchly defends free speech. We have anonymity on the internet, and this is a privacy issue. Every culture is going to set their own bar for what privacy means to them, and it's hard to impose in a global economy one privacy profile, right? But here in the United States, we allow anonymity on the internet, or at least conditional anonymity, but we also allow the free expression of ideas. So.
When you exposed the Chinese cyber spies, you were expecting retaliation from China. The fact that we have these 13 Russians being indicted, what sort of action can we expect from Russia?
Well, it's hard to say because a lot of times, people ask me right before the election, what do you expect out of Russia? And there are times when there's just heightened diligence, and I think that's one of those times. Right now, this indictment, I didn't find it very surprising. I would imagine there's many nations that want to influence elections in many other countries, and one of the tools you have at your disposal is these information operations or influence operations where you can just magnify chaos.
So, Kevin, I'm not going to make you responsible for foreign policy of the United States, but given your technical expertise, we hear about a bloody nose approach in North Korea. Is there the equivalent of that in this cyber area? Do we actually have to, at some point, really attack them in a limited way to sort of brush them back from the plate, to use a different sports analogy?
There will be a lot of varying opinions on that, David, but here's what I think. If we launch attacks in cyberspace against Russia and they're all successful, and they launch attacks back at us and they're all successful, we will lose. So there's just an asymmetry there. Where we are more dependent on open communications. Our economy has an online basis to it that I think is more powerful than any other economy. So cyber domain is probably not the best domain for us to retaliate. We're in the glass house, and sometimes we're throwing rocks at a mud hut. So we got to be careful there.
So finally, to come back to Sherry's first question, as we look forward to the midterm elections right now, is the greater threat to actually have hackers, whether from Russia or somewhere else, that would actually affect the vote count
it would
technically,
be hard to do,
or would it be more the ideological threat that you describe, and we don't know what they're saying and who's saying it?
Well, I think the ideological threat's here forever. It was here before the internet. It's going to be here now. The technical threat during elections, we're going to continue to learn how to do more digital-based elections, and we will be doing shields up. So everybody's going to be very cognizant during elections to protect the vote tally.
Kevin Mandia there, CEO of FireEye, speaking earlier on Bloomberg Television. Coming up, automakers are looking to capitalize on your data, the possible regulatory hurdles that the effort may face next. And if you have a Bloomberg terminal, check out TV Go. You can watch us online. You can click on our charts. If you miss an interview, you can go back to it. You can chat with us directly over the IB. Just go to TV Go on your terminal. And you can contact us on Twitter. I'm at Emily Chang TV. And check out TikTok by Bloomberg, the first 24-hour global news network streaming live on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Uber's go-it-alone approach in Japan isn't working. That's what CEO Dara Khosrowshahi had to say in Tokyo on Tuesday, announcing he is now looking to forge partnerships with local taxi companies. Khosrowshahi made clear Japan's $16 billion taxi market is already high quality, but said it could become even more efficient. After Japan, Khosrowshahi is scheduled to visit India, where Uber is competing against local ride-hailing startup Ola. And the autos industry is racing to a new connected future, one in which wireless connections in cars combined with artificial intelligence is spurring in-car advertising software powered by drivers' personal data. But a big question remains. Can automakers profit off all the data they're capable of collecting without alienating consumers or risking backlash from Washington? For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg's Detroit Bureau Chief, David Welch. So, David, can they?
Sure. The car companies collect a lot of data. Your car knows a lot about you. It knows how many people are in the car because those airbag sensors have to know who's seated and where, and the seatbelt sensors will, the one that beeps at you if you're not buckled in, it knows somebody's sitting in that seat, and it probably knows the weight because the weight tells the car whether or not to beep at you. It knows where you're going. It knows where you've been. It knows where you go on a frequent basis because it sort of tracks through the navigation system frequent destinations and might even suggest your home or your work. So with all that information, if you're driving a certain route, it might pop up ads and say, hey, get this pizza, hey, stop for that Reuben sandwich, or here's some specials on beer and wings, whatever it is. And all that's possible. It's not really happening now. The car companies aren't selling your data at this moment. They do work with some third parties, but they're not en masse selling their data individually. They sell aggregated data and that sort of thing, but it's here to a limited extent, and it's absolutely coming.
And we're talking about all of this being focused on the actual navigation screen. We've talked a lot about distracted driving, but is there a safety issue here?
Yeah, there could be. General Motors had launched something called Marketplace, where you can connect to, say, Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts, and you actually order coffee, or you can make restaurant reservations. And some safety groups have already kind of piped up on this and wondered, okay, you know, are we getting into the area of too much if you're sitting there staring at your screen or even glancing to your screen to order up your latte or whatever it is that you want to go pick up? Is there a safety issue? You know, GM has made the system pretty simple so that you don't really have to spend a lot of time staring at it, but the safety groups are already starting to take notice of this, and you know, they're not in favor of it.
Who are the big players trying to get in on this?
Well, look, there's been a battle in the dashboard here between the automakers and then companies like Google and Apple. You know, those systems right now, CarPlay being one of them, there's already a fight over how much data those systems can access. If you want to use your Apple phone, it'll plug in, it'll basically go on screen, but only certain apps are allowed to go up on that screen and will work with your car. And that's the car company's way of keeping Google, if you happen to be using a Samsung phone and a Droid system, it's their way of keeping Google from mining all of your data in the car. But if you're using, say, Waze, which is a Google-owned navigation app on your phone, Waze knows where you are, and it does flash pop-up ads on the screen of your phone. That doesn't get into the system of your car, but it knows where you're driving because it's tracking you. So it doesn't have to get in the car itself to track your data and give you pop-up advertising or market to you or just know where you are, period.
And last quick question, have regulators weighed in on this yet?
Not really. Look, internet privacy is something where, you know, right now it's kind of the Wild West still. There are laws out there, but, you know, people are giving up a lot of their information for different services online, and cars are kind of the same way. Right now, car executives are saying they don't want to sell your individual data to marketers. They won't do that. But if you look at the story, a couple of them said they don't want to make that statement forever. They're just saying they aren't doing it right now.
All right, David Welch for us in Detroit. David, as always, thank you so much for stopping by. You can read this story on the Bloomberg.com Hyperdrive vertical, our dedicated webpage featuring our best reporting on the future of transportation from teams across Bloomberg News. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On Wednesday's show, we're going to hear from Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes about his new book, Fair Shot, Rethinking Inequality and How We Earn. And he also has some great early stories about Facebook. A reminder, we're live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.